better labor. Amazing when you turn it off. So, that's working better. It's a little bit, you got a little bit of spot or something. Or is it okay?
We're going to need that later on today.
It's like the big green egg.
All right, that's 2:20.
I'm ready.
Ready?
Absolutely, yep.
All right. All right, good. Ladies and gentlemen, our final session of the day. Woo-hoo. Then we can all go home. Yay. Our final afternoon one is with Ed Gilman. We want to thank our platinum sponsor, Alotech, for this event. This one is the Tree Academy, the moving forward from here. So this is our third installment for the week.
Sure.
And I think we're up to 3.
Yeah, for work. Just another day in the life of Ed Gilman.
You have a busy life, too.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I have an
fun
awesome
life.
life. I have an awesome life.
We do have ISA credits for this. There is a sign-up sheet in the back, and there is a sign-up sheet up front. Please make sure you do sign in before you leave today. Also, I want to thank you for attending the conference once again. If you have any feedback, any thoughts, any speakers, any follow-ups you want, please do share it with us at our email, the info@New York State Arborist. We're always looking for great ideas and new speakers. And if we can always get Ed back, we always will.
Yeah, sure. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And so there's lots of ways to learn. You can, on our website, you've got root management cue card, restoration pruning cue card, both sides. Great handouts for customers. You're welcome to use them. They're free. All you got to do is print them and get them laminated. Tree pruning cue card, structural pruning, pruning and planting. We're going to be talking a lot about that. ISA puts out about an 80-page best management practices pruning. And I and my colleagues wrote about a 90-page version and then 476-page version. There's no excuse not to learn more about pruning. Yes, sir. What's that?
Where do you get those bookmarks?
These little things?
Yeah.
These you can get on the University of Florida website. Just Google, there it is there. There's the address, but just Google Ed Gilman. You'll go right to the University of Florida website. Yeah, you can't miss it. They're right there. Just click around. They're very easy to find. So with all that brief introduction, let's, for 10 minutes, talk about what storms do to trees. And then we're going to talk about how to prevent the damage. And when I say prevent, I pretty much mean prevent the damage. So here's some of the take-homes from the storms that I was most engaged with, hurricanes, particularly tropical storms, 04, 05, and then onward, in Florida and the Gulf Coast in general. And then ice storms before that, when I lived in Charlotte, and Greensboro, and New Jersey, we got some of the ice storms there as well. Number one, sprouts become your new crown after these storms. Therefore, sprouts are your friends, and you want sprouts. So see, how's the best way to encourage sprouts? Healthy trees. So then the first step after a storm, after you've got things cleaned up, is encourage vitality. How do you do that? You manage the soil. All the things that you know about, all the health things, get the turf gone, add a couple of inches of mulch, irrigate when you need to, all the common sense things that you guys and gals already know about. The third thing, trees that are in that have a great structure beforehand are a cinch to clean up. And some limbs may take 2 or 3 years to sprout. Has anyone noticed that after storms? That some limbs do not sprout right away. You've noticed that? What species do you recall? Little leaf. Linden?
It lost its top
And just sat there for a couple of years. Yeah, we've seen it. I saw it a lot through the Carolinas, some in Florida. So yes. So with that, just a few slides on broken trees and what we've learned. Number one, let's look at excurrent species. Species like Taxonia, Metasequoia, grandiflora, Magnolia grandiflora. when the aspect ratios are small, in other words, small branches on dominant trunk, these do very well after an ice storm. These do very well after a leaf-on snow event. This is after 2 ice storms went through Elon University back in late 2000 and late 2000s, 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there. And then also on the same area of North Carolina, same campus, the young excurrent trees like Quercus phellos and others that are like it that have an excurrent growth habit early on, or have been pruned to an excurrent growth habit. All right, so they did very well after the storms. Very important take-home lesson. Nyssa and all the other excurrent species. Nyssas do so well in urban areas as well. The decurrent and spreading type canopies, when the trees are young, they do pretty well. But then as the trees get older, here's an older white oak on the North Carolina Elon campus that obviously has been taken apart by this half-inch ice storm. Pretty bad storm. Also, the overlifted and thinned or lion's tail trees, very difficult. First of all, very susceptible to breakage because literally the tail is wagging the dog and they break. So you can see this here in about a 70-mile-an-hour tropical storm in Gainesville, Florida, where I live. Also, because the interior of these trees have been taken out, there are no existing laterals to cut back to. So your only choice is tree removal or make heading cuts. So that gives you poor choices when you overlift and thin or lion's tail a tree. It's much more easy to take, here's 2 examples of the same species. I pruned this 3 times until the tree was this size. We planted it the size of my thumb. I pruned it 3 times to this size. Now the trunk is like this. It's about 40 feet by 60 feet now, dominant leader. And Bubba's tree service, I made that name up, pruned, overlifted, and thinned this and topped it. Somebody topped it early on. That's down there in Naples, someplace, South Florida. So very difficult to restore that thing on the right. Much easier to restore a tree that starts with good structure. All right, so very briefly, when you pull apart a tree artificially or watch how trees respond in storms, these are much more difficult to pull out of the tree than these. What's the difference between those and this one? What's the difference? Codominance? No, there's no bark inclusion in either one. Now, I'd say no bark inclusion.
Angle.
What's that?
The angle.
Angle does not matter. What does matter?
The tissue on the branch collar? Branch collar?
Size of the wound. The size of the branch compared to the trunk. What's that called? Aspect ratio, right? So when this is small compared to that, it's much harder to pull that apart. Seen it in ice storms, snowstorms with leaves on, and mechanically we can do it artificially. When you've got them the same size, you can tell by the dent when we pulled these off. It took a lot more force. Look at how much more dented that branch is than we measured it with a load cell as well. But it took about twice the force to pull that apart compared to the codominant stem. So what does that tell you about how to prune trees? It tells you you want a lot of this and you don't want any of that. Man, if you can teach that to your fellas and gals that are pruning your trees at planting in the first 15 years, you've got it. And this stuff, these cards, all these 3 books will expand on all that, on how to do it, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So you can go after a storm and see the 2 small aspect ratio branches on this ash are still on the tree. This is a thunderstorm in Ohio. I just happened upon this park. The biggest aspect ratio, the codominant stem, is on the ground. The medium-sized aspect ratio has cracked out, but it's somehow still on the tree. So you can see a great example. And I can go to any storm pretty much, and you can see this all over. The big stuff is broken. The small aspect ratios are still, there's a conifer white pine probably on the right. So this seems to be pretty universal whether you're in Singapore, Maine, New York, Florida, Puerto Rico, the Caribbean. South America I've not been to, but I've pruned South American trees in the Caribbean, and it seems to work the same way there. The other thing we've seen is this is an ice storm, and the uprights, I've circled them with a red circle. The uprights often will break. The more horizontal branches, not as much. So notice there are no real or not many broken horizontal branches compared to the broken uprights. So if you're managing tree, what might be one of your goals then? To minimize what? The amount of uprights. See how easy this is? We could end there. Let me show you some examples. So we take a tree like this, 10 years later, same exact tree on campus where I used to work. And there it is 10 years later. Same tree. Huge crack. This is a different tree, but you see a huge crack here. I took this photograph hoping that someday it would break, and sure enough, 3 years later we got this 70-mile-an-hour Hurricane Fran come through town. And that is the same stem that broke out that I photographed 3 years earlier. So, in listening to the wonderful last presentation, when the gentleman was speaking about preventing and reducing or mitigating storm damage, the best way to reduce storm damage is preventive pruning, and that starts at planting. I don't know of a better approach to preventing tree damage and storm cleanup after a storm. So if you think of one, let me know before I leave, or pop me an email. All right, so that's a brief introduction. Let's go now to the heart of the issue. Uh-oh, here's a better plug in. We have to plug. Plug that in. Thanks, I appreciate that. Okay, great. Starting and maintaining the urban forest. What's not taught in class? It's too bad, but that's where we are as a profession. It's just not taught in class. I looked at a lot of curricula over the past day in preparation for today. And it's tough to find many courses on pruning, nonetheless syllabus that have more than a lecture or two on pruning. So we have to teach ourselves how to do this, and that's what I'm here to help you do. So my goal today is to make you think differently about tree structure and how it develops. And we're going to focus on planted trees today, not trees that have seeded themselves in place. So planted trees, because they're very different than trees that are in the forest. And I've done a lot of these outdoor workshops all over the country, all over the world. You see lots of places I've been on the left there. The asterisk, I've been back more than once. 2 asterisks, been back more than twice. So people actually invite me back after doing what I'm going to show you here. All right, so I have no control over that. Here's a question. Was that stem that broke on this American elm on the tree when the tree was planted?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely, without a question. All right? Very good. There's the same tree 23 years later. Do we need to cut down every tree that's got a big coat out on the stem busted to the bottom? I don't think so. I think this tree is teaching us a lot of lessons. You might say, oh, it's in a lawn area. No, this is in the most endowed botanical garden in the country. This is Longwood Gardens in Philadelphia. Not all that far from here, near Philadelphia, I should say. So broken and decayed trees are not always a removal. Pretty cool. The tree stands today, so it's been 32 years since that picture I took in 1990 with an Nikon film camera. So it's a little fuzzy. So let's look at what trees do in nature, because we're going to focus mostly on trees that are planted. This is what Liriodendron does in the North Carolina Joyce Kilman Memorial Forest. Anybody been there? 7-foot diameter Liriodendrons, 160 feet tall or so, and then planted. Look how different they are. In nature, the first branch is up 70, 80 feet. Here, the first branch is up, 15 feet, let's just say, 12, 15 feet. Now what's going to happen to this is this is going to want to develop into a big shrub because those branches have been forced to grow in the nursery. So this is still part of the nursery canopy, probably at the top of the tree as it was planted. This tree was probably shaped about like this when it was planted. Top of the tree of planting about here. All the low branches have been shaded out or removed. 2 to 3 limbs at the top that were the size of a pencil were left on the tree. They're all going to grow up, and how long are they now? 60 years after planting. 60 feet, 80 feet, and then they come out. And do they always stay on the tree when they go out there, about 55, 65 feet or so? Absolutely. So we're asking a tree to do what it's really not used to doing here, planting and leaving it in the landscape. Let's look at a different species. This is Quercus virginiana. This is live oak in its native habitat near Tampa. Here's the same tree in Jacksonville where I live. Same species of tree. So this one is leaning on the ground. This one leans its branches and is protected by its neighbors. This one's really protected by its lack of height and lots of spread and literally leaning on the ground. This one was not protected by either because it was line-tailed by the farmer who owned the tree for many years before donating it to the county and the state essentially because it was the largest of its kind. So it was line-tailed because cattle would graze underneath and they needed room for the cattle. So all the branches were at the end, all the foliage was at the end. The tree eventually failed, and now it's full of brown rot and mess. It's falling apart, unfortunately. Here's another example of arboriculture. So this is a tree that's now in the open. We're pruning it to raise the crown because that's what we do in urban areas for many different reasons, clearance and children climbing on the tree, etc. So if we go into many of our botanical gardens, here we are in Montreal Botanic Garden. In Montreal, they've got a great collection. This is Japanese maple. And look at the structure of that tree. It reminds me of a tree growing in the woods, especially the top half. Now in the woods, the lower branches would have been shaded out. But the art and science of bonsai, probably thousands of years old, I don't know a whole lot about it. But notice the aspect ratio and you can only see this one, but the aspect ratio on most bonsais is small. So the branches are small compared to the trunk. So they're mimicking what they see in Mother Nature. I don't know enough about it to know why that is and why the folks have raised them that way. I have some theories, but they're probably not correct. So the second lesson is the small aspect ratio makes trees strong. And whether that's one reason why bonsai has taken this form or not, I'm not sure. Here's the same form of tree. This is Quercus robur in downtown Stockholm, Sweden. Stockholm, right? That's Stockholm, yeah. So you can see people. How about we do this? Does that work like that? Okay, cool. You can see the people, so it's about 7 feet diameter. The tree is in the 700-year range. The only reason my hosts knew that, because 2 streets over there was a tree of similar size, these ridiculous giants. You know, the king owned all the roburs in the countryside for naval reasons, for booms and masts and the like. So you could not, as a landowner, cut the trunk, but you could cut the branches. So over the years, sprouts developed from all this pruning, and most of these are probably sprouts. Not sure about the branches on the top, but certainly ones in the middle and the lower are sprouts, and that's why they're your friends, right? I mean, 700 years old, pretty hard to argue with that sprouts are bad. And it's the same large trunk, small aspect ratio, obviously a strong tree over 700 years old. So your goal then as an urban manager, because we're talking mostly about urban, voice okay? Can you guys still hear me okay? So if this is what you want, are you better starting with this or this as your nursery stock? Left or right? Left. Left. So if you plant this, you got a much better chance, especially if you don't have much pruning planned or there isn't the budget to put any pruning into it. Better all starting with this than that. Now, if I can blow that up, you can see about 5 or 6 branches of similar size. There's a cluster there. What's going to happen when you plant this out in the open? They're all now subjected to the same sunlight, the plumbing system is set, and so they're all going to grow about the same rate. How do we get this? We have to ask for it. How many full-time growers are in here? Again, just to remind ourselves. 1. Congratulations and thank you for being here. So, if we're not asking growers for this, guess what? We're not going to get it. So, specify better nursery stock, and we talked about this yesterday. I'm going to repeat this graphic because it's a real good take-home message. Is we want the top with small aspect ratios. We don't want this because we just have to fix that. If you start with that on the right, you see that nursery stock on the right, everything grows, and we lose control of the architecture that we want in the urban landscape, which is some clearance, 15, 20 feet up, over buses, trucks, and so forth. So we have some control over the resistance to that tree in a storm, to break. We want, if these all grow at the same rate, these become more susceptible to breakage as the tree grows. It's growing basically in a bush form. We've really not taught our industry what to do with this. And so we leave it, or take off a couple of low branches and leave the 4 or 5 that are growing up. So we end up with a 6 to 10 foot trunk and then a collection of upright branches. So that is what is so common. So what happens is we as arborists come in 15 years later because we probably haven't pruned the trees in most cases up until that point. In most cases. Arborists have not touched the tree yet. 15, 20 years later, and because everything is growing up, your really only way to create clearance for signs or for street lights is the lion's tail tree. Because your customer is not going to tolerate you removing large little branches. Anybody with me? Does anybody agree? That's why lion's tailing. That's why we're asked to lion's tail. We don't get there early enough. So it's key to make both removal cuts. Every cut here is a removal cut. And capital letters, reduction cuts. So in other words, take off a little bit less on the bottom like this. So get some clearance, work with the customer. We're not going to take it all the way up to where you want it. We'll do that next time, selling, pruning 2 years down the road. We're going to take some of what we would have removed here, and we're going to go to the ends of each of those 8 branches and make a reduction cut or 2 on each one of them. We want to suppress those to get growth to go up into the leaf. So, but it's hard to catch up here, because this tree's pretty committed to that form, right? So we want to start earlier. So here's an Acer rubrum. I picked a species to work with in Florida because it's grown all over the country, including up here. And the cultivars are very similar, if not worse, than Acer rubrum. I grew these from cuttings, and here's a close-up of one. Not bad. You've got small aspect ratios up to about here, but now you've got 2, 3 ratios that are almost the size of the trunk. So those branches are big compared to the trunk. Now they're small. They're only this big, but the aspect ratio is 1 to 1 here. So you got the plumbing system is set. How are we doing with the camera, okay? The plumbing system is set, and so just like water diverts equally into 2 equal sized branches, same thing happens with the growth. It's going to go into the 2 sides. You've lost control of the architecture. The tree gets bigger. Bigger yet, this tree is right outside the parking lot there, right? I parked right in front of it. I probably took this 15 years ago, and I was here, a long time ago. Every time I come and take a picture, and you can go out and see it now, it's still there. There it is, there. So now the grade structure. What happens to these trees is there's so many branches, same species, Acer rubrum. But if you look at the top, very top of the photograph on this one, the top of the tree's got a big 12-inch cut because it's died out. So there's so many branches on this tree in one spot, right in here, that it's cut off the vascular tissue and the wood from reaching the top. So the root stuff, all the stuff coming up from the roots can no longer reach the top because of all the diversion of resources out to the branches. Now, if I can superimpose a tree in here, the trunk would be here, the nursery crown would be here, most likely, all or most of those branches were on the tree when the tree was planted. So, our goal, one of our goals, and just always in the back of your mind, is the nursery canopy, the canopy that you sell to arborists, gets pruned out of the tree over time. Now, it's a 20-foot tree. There may be a couple of branches in the top 5 feet that are permanent. But if you're planting 2-inch caliper, 10-foot, 11-foot tall trees, 3-inch caliper, 14-foot tall trees, there's probably no permanent branches on that tree unless you keep them very small with routine pruning, and then most of the growth goes into the lead. Then the bottom ones shade out naturally, or neighbors will take the little branches off, and it's of no consequence. How are we doing, okay? Is this interesting? It's a different way to look at stuff, right? So we've got planting details. Again, I can't stress this enough. Please consider using these and taking them. They're free. You can edit them. And like I said yesterday, we start here and say that should be less than 2/3 of that. But in Florida, we say less than half because we're about 20 years down the road working with our growers with this process. So we've got to get, right now your industry is like this. Here's the growers. Here's arboriculture in general. So only conversations can get you here. That's the only way to do it. You can't do it with specs or details. Only you've got to start the conversation and get closer together. There's a much longer story there, obviously, how that gets done. I'd be glad to share that sometime. 6th lesson. Where are the other 5? Did we go through these? I guess we did go through the other 5. Lesson number 6. Prudent planting, and here's why. The branch architecture may not be ideal when you get the tree. Ask yourself this: is that tree likely to receive structural pruning in the next 15 years? Usually the answer is no. And let me set the stage here. Growers set structure not on longevity in mind. It's not their job. Their job is to get the tree out the door. My best friends are growers in Florida. And I've spent 25 years with them. And I can name them, the biggest nurseries. They're on board. They wrote us checks for about 12 years to fund our research, to learn a lot more, so we ended up like this. And it's just not what they do. Structure is set more by tradition, convenience in the nursery, visual appearance, what the customer wants. The customers, contractors, landscape architecture, owners of property. Those are the customers. So when you grow tree, that's what you want to please those people. Growers have not been presented with specifications that show that lead with small aspect ratio branches on a routine basis. Their experience and understanding of tree structure, because they have generally not received this type of training. They don't know what you know. They don't have the experience. Most arborists probably could not go into a tree farm and grow a quality tree with efficiency. Fair enough? I've worked enough with both to know, and I've learned a tremendous amount in the last 30 years from our growers. So it's probably not as arborist friendly as you'd like, so you've got to fix it. That's where your industry is right now. And to a certain extent, we're still there in Florida, but we're probably a little bit farther down the road. By not structurally pruning and planting, you're accepting that growers understand your job. So you have to ask yourself, do they? I don't know, do you think they do? Do you think the growers understand the implications of large aspect ratio and not fixing that at planting? Probably not, because they're busy at their own conferences. They talk to their buds, and that's just the way life is. But getting a little bit closer will help the situation. So let me bring you through some more examples to maybe come together in some sort of agreement here. So here's 3 trees I grew. They're in 45-gallon containers 3 years after the little liners we planted. We get about 1 inch in caliper a year, typically. So let's take one, and I'm pointing to the leader in white, but there's a lot of company up there. Now that tree's got a lead to the top. I think I could take trees like that all day long. I would love to take trees, but I need to make about 8 pruning cuts. I don't need to take all those branches off that I'm pointing to. But I need to do something with them. So, here we are, same picture, reduced down in size. Let's follow that. That aspect ratio is close to 1. Funding system is about equal. So let's plant that tree and grow it for 6, 7 years. So that's the same point on the tree. Both sides grew. No surprise there. That's what trees do. If you start with this, 10 years later, you got this, but everything's bigger. Doesn't move up the tree like everybody knows that. So here's a close-up. So do you like that form on acres? Is that a strong form in our urban forest? Of course not. Of course it's not. And look how small that was at planting. It was pretty innocent looking. Boom, I'd hit that and take it off, or take 70 or 80% of it off back to a lateral using a reduction cut, which is the same cut the growers are using in the nursery, unless they have to make a heading cut. Now sometimes you have to make heading cuts to slope, especially on something like a maple. But oaks and many of the other tillias and many of the other species, very, very easy to make reduction cuts. Yes, sir?
When you did this experiment, did you root prune before you planted?
No. No.
Took them out and threw them in the ground?
Well, we didn't throw too many around, but, you know, we put them in the ground and planted them, and yeah, and there it was, 6 years later. Weak structure that could have been prevented by pruning and planting. So we take that tree on the right and we grow it. This is in Pennsylvania, different trees, of course. Just a couple of examples. The trees get older. Here we are on a golf course in North Carolina. Just happened to be walking by there. And there's my best estimate of what the tree looked like when it was planted. So it's hard to tell what's going on here. I'm going to show you a close-up in just a second. But look at all the branchiness that comes from that one spot of the tree. And all the trees, here's another red maple. You can see they all have the same structure. So it had a 6-foot clear trunk at planting, and then the middle part of the nursery crown, all those branches just went straight up. That's what they do. Do you want that as your tree 40 years after planting? You know, obviously not. So were these all on the tree when the tree was planted? Oh yeah, every one of them. Does this make a case for pruning and planting? If this doesn't make a case for you, you're in the wrong room. Because, you know, I've seen this now all over. I became aware of this, I don't know, the last 10 or 15 years, just looking at trees and how they fail, and working in a nursery a lot on campus and in various nurseries in Florida for many, many years. So we can get, yes ma'am?
I have a species-specific question.
Okay. I don't know.
In New York City, there's so many Zelkovas,
Yes.
and they have like that, it's almost like a pear tree. Where
Yeah, it's almost like this pistachio here on the left. Yeah. Right.
In fact, there's like twice as many
Right. Yeah.
that are coming from that same.
So you have two options. You can either prune the heck out of it, and you end up with one lead, and I'll show you a picture of that, or you can ignore it and prune the rest of your trees.
Yeah, and there's also like the wireless form, which is like supposed to go around.
Yeah, come on, seriously? Come on.
This is one.
You believe that? I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you, right? So what can happen with these is there's not physical space on the trunk. Many of us that have read Chagos and other people's work know that this just is a weak structure. And here's the an all-encompassing photo of that photo I showed you earlier. The biggest one is on the ground. They were all on the tree when the tree was planted. Absolutely. That was the top of the crown when it was planted. Probably a little double leader or triple leader at the top. Little snip. How about this big live oak? 60-mile-an-hour wind, busted. Was that on the tree when the tree was planted? Absolutely. Yeah. One little snip. Take care of it, reduce it, head it, remove it, whatever. I planted this tree in 1989. It's a Chinese elm, almost parvifolia. Here it was. So in the nursery, the growers suppress the branches to push the leader up, right? That's what you do. That's how you get the leader up there. You suppress the branch. You don't take them off because then you got nothing left to sell. So you suppress them. So when we planted this in 1989, we had 80 people planting trees that day. That was kind of hairy. All volunteers. So now the system now it goes in the opposite direction. So now the grower is gone, tree's out on its own, and now the branches have access to what? Sunlight, and that's the biggest growth regulator on the planet. Everything grows. That suppresses the leader. Now, so exactly the opposite of what the grower was doing. Here's the same tree 14 years later. So the branch is in the same position. The branch remains in the same position. So now it's too low, the branch is too low for the lawnmowers on campus. And so it was removed, that low left branch was removed. There was no upward component at all. There was not even a way to Lionsdale this tree. So it came off. 9 inch, that's good for the tree, right? That low one. All you have to do is go out the front door and hang a right on the tilia, and there's about 8 big cuts on with sprouts all coming up. It looks like, to see an example of this. You don't have to go far.
I find Attilia always has a lot of competing
Branches.
even in an average nursery.
It's kind of like Sokovia. You've got to hit it probably 3 times a year. Yeah. I mean, our routine is twice a year in Florida, but that species like American elm, same thing, and either cultivars that grow really fast. The third thing that happens with not pruning and planting, we talked about broken, we talked about these large low cuts that have to be made. We talked about the tree eventually having to be Lionsdale if you do very little in the first 15 years except take off low branches, is this. So come up to this on the Virginia Tech campus. The tree looks extremely healthy except for the top center. So what's going on? So I take a look at the root system. Now I'm pretty happy with that. So like, it's not a root defect. Would anybody agree? See lots of straight roots? That's not a trick question, right? I mean, it looks really healthy. Then I look at the rest of the tree, and you can see the nursery crown. There it is, right there. So all the branches that were on the tree when the tree was planted, this was a 6 foot of clear trunk. So when you get a tree from the nursery, typically it's a little wider at the bottom than the top. The branches in the lower part of the canopy are the oldest, so those are typically the biggest. And so 50 years later, they're still the biggest in the same spot. Of course, they don't move up the trunk. So you've got a big mess. So all that diversion of goodies out to the branches cuts off the leader, and the leader declines. How many have seen that phenomenon in the landscape? Yeah. Have you put that together by yourself? Okay. I mean, there's no research on it. It's just
Assumed it was very silly.
all over. Yeah.
It's like radial encroachment, though, as they all try to grow radially in a too compact a space. Not only do they press their other apart, but they reduce sap flow to each other as well.
Exactly. Right. So the sap can't get from the root system. It can't get around the branch because the branch is getting so big, and the next one is right next to it. And so the very little wood can get around and get up because there's another cluster of branches right above that. So the leader declines. I've seen it in, the opposite, like dogwood and ashes and oaks and elms and whatever this is, probably a maple of some sort. Yeah.
So would you recommend reducing some of those
This?
larger, lower
Oh,
branches?
I
so
don't
it's
know.
too
We're not
big
here
for
to
your
mature
tree?
trees, but yeah, we'll talk later about that. Yeah, I'd love to, maybe next year or something. The plumbing system is set in the nursery without correcting it. Results are not good. So I just showed you 4 things that can happen. Here's 10 years later, same tree. Just like tooth decay, bark inclusions don't go away, they get worse. Here's a tree along the streets in Singapore, and there's a different tree next to it. But that on the left is going to turn to that on the right because the plumbing system is already set there. All right, we're doing very well. So it doesn't matter where you are on the planet. Here we are in Copenhagen, just across from Malmo, where the conference, the ISA International Conference will be. If you haven't been, I've been to Malmo 4 or 5 times doing various seminars and so forth. And just across the bridge where the competition, the climbing is going to be, is Copenhagen. It's a great place. I'd recommend you go. I can't go because I've got a closing on a property, but anyway. So what's going on here is the grower did a fantastic job of producing a leader. So from here down was the nursery tree, from my finger down. So it did a great job of suppressing the lateral branch growth. But at the top of the tree, very top, there were 3 or 4 leaders, or little branches, very small, pencil size in diameter, I'm guessing. And so you can almost see 2 trees. Look how big each of these are. And these are less than half the size of these 3 or 4 at the top. It's because the grower's gone. The guy that knew what they were doing is gone. Now no one's done anything, right? And so there's two different tree forms there. Here's the irony, right? And I can't show you this in slides. You have to be out to see trees to see this. But typically, each of the this is a response to what was going on in the nursery. So the nursery suppresses, trees going up, and up, suppress, up. Then the grower's gone, ships the tree, may have pruned the trees 8 to 12 months ago. So in that 8 to 12 months, you got some little codoms at the top like this, right? They're almost never taken off, so you end up with that. So that's a response to what was going on in the nursery. So we have to control that response. But what often happens is each of the leaves that come up have a more natural form. And I typically don't see codoms or bark inclusions in the new growth. Now it'd be down here. That's where you'll find your codoms and the bark inclusions back at the original nursery camp. So much to learn. But you don't have to do much reading about this at all. I mean, I got lots to read about there in 2 of those books, but just start looking around at red lights. You're sitting there. Don't look at your phone. Look at the 3 or 4 trees you can see on the intersection. You will see the original nursery crown, and you'll see the response. Whether the tree is this big or this big or this big, you can see it. See it all over the parking lot. We can see the topping too, of course, but I mean, if you look back, you can see the original. So both of those are going to grow. They're about the same size, 25 years later. So both grow, they stay the same size relative to one another. So that is what can happen. So what we're suggesting, and what we've shown over many years now, is reducing one side and not doing much to the other. So reducing one side a lot and correcting some minor stuff a little. Which side is going to grow more? The one that was not pruned very much. We've documented this. It's in the scientific literature. You just go to my website, click, and you go to the Arboriculture and Urban Forestry, the ISA Journal, to show this. So growth is going to come in here. This is going to be suppressed. So here's the tree 25 years later. You got a little branch, much bigger trunk. And you just keep doing this 3 or 4 times first 25 years, and you got a wonderful structure. So you change the aspect ratio over time. It becomes smaller and smaller over time. So that branch becomes stronger attached. This is not hard. It's not hard. I'm just trying to show you lots of examples of it. So, yes, sir.
So you got a B&B, you put it in the ground. Let's say percentage-wise, how much foliage can you remove without the trees getting stressed because you planted it?
So
How
you
much
remove don't worry about the percentage. Remove what needs to be done.
Really, don't, see, I'm nervous about that.
Stop reading the literature that talks about percent. It's irrelevant. It's based on so little. I review the literature in that big book there, if you care to, and I got the citations where that came from, and the little pots that these little studies were done in with trees the size of my pinky. It's not to say that they're not terrible studies, they just have no meaning to us in arboriculture. Because the bigger issue for us is preventing storm damage later. And if that tree grows 10% slower or 5% slower because we prune one side at planting, I can live with that compared to the storm damage because you got this to clean up 50 years later or 30 years later. So nothing's perfect in life, right? It's a trade-off. You're trading off. We show we may not get to the study we did, but it's published in the Arboriculture and Urban Forestry ISA Journal, where we can show a change in aspect ratio over time. And about a 10% reduction, 5 or 10% reduction in growth from that pruning and planting. So there is a price, but it's so small you can't see it. You have to measure it. So this is everybody else. You got the bush, and you take off the low branches, and you end up with a bigger bush. Not terribly strong in storms, because these are very long, and they're starting to grow to the side. We talk a lot in track about leaning trees, right? So you basically have 6 or 8 leaning trees on that one tree. Now, some of them develop reaction wood, and that helps make them strong and all that, but this is the new you. So we're going to go this way, make reduction cuts on the competition, just like what was done in the nursery, except we're gonna be making bigger cuts. You know, we're not gonna be making half-inch cuts and quarter-inch cuts. We're gonna be making bigger cuts because the tree hasn't been pruned at all, and you end up with sort of a modified leader, central leader, more or less. I showed you this yesterday, but this is the new you. This is everybody else. So if you look at the new you, many of the branches that were on the tree in the nursery are now gone. Right, because this, you're up, what, 18 feet or so, I think. This is in Melbourne, Australia. I'm glad I went there when I did, because it's like closed society now. And nursery branches are still on that branch, on that tree on the right. You got a mess on the right. I don't want, if I were a municipal arborist managing trees, don't give me that. I don't want that on my streets. I want some version of this. Those are one complaint. Downtown Savannah. So the first branch is up by the street light, pretty much. Here's a nursery tree going in, 2.5-inch caliper, 14 feet tall or so. How many permanent branches are on that nursery tree? 0. Every branch on that tree, you see, because there's the top of the tree, and the first branch is going to be 4 or 5 feet on top of that. So there's no permanent branches. So what does that mean for you to do as a manager? It means if these are all going to come off, then now, right now, today or next week, you suppress the uprights. Make the tree branches grow this way. So the tree gets taller and then branches out where you want it. Otherwise, you're going to be taking a lot more carbon to the dump with you, or to the chipper pile. So what we're showing you puts more carbon in the permanent canopy that will be there forever, and it's more storm resistant. I don't think there's any downsides, except you gotta do it. It doesn't happen. You can get a little, you can species yourself a little bit. In other words, taxodiums, metasequoias, chilies that are pruned right in the nursery, because eventually they do have an excurrent growth habit, but you kind of have to prune out all this stuff at first. The bigger trees, you'll see trees that have a nice lead. You just got to, you'll see them out there in the population, even though they're cultivars and all genetically the same. You can prune it out. So, when I drew this 20 years ago, I thought it was good structure and it was okay for them, but now I've come to realize this is better. Better way to prevent large wounds on the tree, or lines tailing, or having to watch that tree break apart in a storm. So I showed you this later, and these are all temporary branches. Showed you this yesterday. So temporary branches, these all come off the tree. So we went into the nurseries, we're looking for 6,000 or 7,000 trees that were pruned this way and couldn't find them, so we had to go in there and do the work ourselves and train the guys how to do this. So these are all going to come off in the landscape eventually over the next 8, 10, 12 years or so, depending on the situation. If it's out in the landscape or with a bunch of trees, you probably can leave them on forever. But we want it to grow up and over so we get a nice canopy like that. So this is how you get that along your streets. You got to start off with that, or some version of that. Anybody willing to try this? I see a lot of that. That's good. All right, try it on your neighbor's tree first, I would recommend. See how it works out, right? So the goals are 2 things. You kind of summarize where we're at here. Reduce the growth rate of the largest low branches. We showed you how they can cause issues, cutting off the leaders and the other things we covered. And reduce the occurrence of these. So you're cutting these back, and you bring those in. What 99% of trees, how they're pruned in the U.S. now, is these are brought back or removed, and these are left. And so you get that upright mess. So here's what pruning and planting can do for you. We just planted this tree. You can see a reduction cut we made here. 1 year later, look at how the aspect ratios changed. So they're about the same when we pruned. It's a young tree, it's a little caliper, like 1.5 inches or so. And then look at the aspect, this is a lot smaller than the trunk now, right? And then 4 years later on the right, so on the extreme right. So 1 year later, you can see the reduction cut. Here's the reduction cut 4 years later. So look how you change. So this is so much stronger now than the codon 4 years ago. So this does work. It works on every species on the planet I've ever pruned. Because you can see we go back to a lot of places around, whether it's Singapore, but not 3 or 4 times there, Hong Kong twice, California, some of the parks 4 or 5 times. We go back to the same trees, so we can see things change. So if you can summarize it in drawings, 3 ways to teach this. If you're bought into this at all, there's easy way to teach it. You teach your volunteers or your staff, whoever you're working with, pick out a leader. Now, I do my own drawings, so I made it easy for me. It's not always like that, right? You got 3 or 4 and nothing's really straight. Just pick out what seems to be the best. Pick out the competition, and then decide whether you want to apply a light dose or a heavier dose. So amount of pruning. So this would be appropriate for like a residence, for example, where you're on a more frequent pruning cycle. This might be more appropriate when you're on a 5-year pruning cycle, or you may never prune the tree again. Always using a reduction cut. Very few removal cuts on these young trees. So what would you do here?
Short it to one right.
So you got 2 competitors. One, very good. And then so here's your lead. So more or less left this intact. Now here's a double, right? You catch that? So we headed that one back, made a heading cut on it, and then reduced the other 2 for sure with reduction cuts. Probably took 70% off of this. Here's your cut right there. So that's a good amount of wood and buds you're taking off there. That's really going to suppress it a lot. We've showed, you can read the study if you'd like from my website into the ISA journal, where the more you prune on a branch, the slower it grows, which makes common sense, but they call me Dr. Obvious. So here's a park young tree, probably 3 inches in caliper or so before and after pruning. Push your growth up into this is almost like what you'd be doing at the nursery, as a grower. So suppress it with reduction cuts. Nice thing about reduction cuts is nobody really knows you were there. This was a linear park along a body of water, so we were able to kind of leave the low branches intact. There wasn't any road for clearance or visibility needed.
Was that a willow oak?
That was a Quercus lobata. Yep, so it was California Valley oak. But it looks like a willow oak. It does, yeah. Good pass for a big, the leaves, the small leaves and all. So we wanted to put some numbers to this. Only one person on the planet had done so. He was he still is, I met him, Copenhagen tree manager. He has a master's, and as part of his master's thesis, he pruned some trees at planting or not. And we wanted to see if we could duplicate the same thing on red maple here in the States. So we pruned at planting. You can see the reduction cuts that we made on this. See the cuts up here, or we did no pruning and planting. Trees were 45-gallon containers, almost 3 inches in caliper, so within the NC standard measurements. Planted them, this looks like it's 1 year after planting, and we went 2 years and measured. We lost, when we pruned at planting, we lost 5 millimeters of caliper growth. So it's about that much. I work in shop with millimeters, so it's easier. So yeah, it's about 5 millimeters of growth. That's what we lost. So these grew 2 inches in caliper in the 2 years after planting, no pruning at planting. These grew 5 millimeters less than that. So I had asked 2 of my staff members to come out that were working with me at the time. I said, can you see any difference between these 2 rows of trees? The same size? They said, no, they look the same size to me. So we were able to measure it. It was statistically significant, but practically not significant at all. We measured all kinds of things, like we pulled the trees over to see if they were, I broke trees for a living. That's what I did. I could ruin a good set of trees in no time. We measured the amount of roots that came out into the landscape soil. A couple other things, and nothing was different. Everything was the same, except a little bit of reduction in caliper growth and much better form nice dominant leaders compared to the mess in the canopies when we did not permit planting. And the grower of these trees was me. I grew the trees. So, yeah, I grew them the best I could with the time we had. Usually 2 prunings a year, but they're not all perfect. You ever notice that? Not all your trees are perfect coming out of the nursery. It's just the way life goes, right? So here's Zelkova. Somebody asked about Zelkova. Yep. So this is in DC. So here's a removal cut. So I find myself on the awful structured, disease-resistant American elm. You ever notice that? How awful the structure? No?
Yes.
Yeah. It's just terrible. You got to use a lot of removal cuts. Remove. So you've got 8 branches competing, right? Remove 4, and cut back 2, and leave 1. Is the tree going to look great when you're done? No. Is it going to still be there in 15 years? Yeah. If you walk from Union Station to the DC Monument and walk through those elms, there's a lot of new ones that have been planted over the last 10 to 20 years or so, and they're already busted apart. And they're only this big in diameter at the base. So it's a real shame arborists were not involved, evidently, in the National Arboretum's program to develop the resistant cultivars. But we got what we got. So here's a Zelkova, very similar to those awful habit. Removal cut, and then lots of reduction cuts here. You just have to be pretty aggressive and just go for it. You know, you have a little section in the city, go volunteer for your comrade in a different section. Say, here, I'll help you out. And prune her trees or his trees. But you got to practice and see what you're comfortable with, what the neighborhood is comfortable with, and just take it from there. Here's American elm, and you can see what we left, a big lead in the. If you look at some of the old, you go to Minneapolis or some of the other places there's some out in Long Island still left, the big American elm populations and you look at the structure, those branches are 5 to 10 feet apart on the old big elms. There's not a lot of this. There's some of that. There'll be like a codominant stem, but there's not a lot of clustered in the older trees. They're spread apart, so don't be afraid. Your first branch might be here, the next one might be 8 feet up eventually. A little bit of visual pain in the meantime on some of them. So I traveled the world, first more in 19 and before than lately, but here I was walking around Oslo, and there was a planting of mostly North American native trees. So Gleditsia was planted on Oslo, Norway, right? Yeah, Oslo, Norway, right by the train station. And you can see the reduction cuts they're making there, up there. And so I asked them, and all the species, here's Tilia, same thing. You can see the different cuts. I went back to the conference where I was speaking and asked them why they're pruning that way. And they said, because they blew up my book and they read it. And I don't think they were blowing smoke, So it was kind of cool to see that. So I'll remind you that this is everyone else. This is the new you, making reduction cuts to reduce the competition, to try to get that lead to go up in the middle. All right, how we doing? Home stretch, 10 more minutes. We're done. So then look at this group. Now, what I challenge you to say, I mentioned this earlier, is this is the reaction to growing in the nursery. The grower here, this is on the Penn State campus, that's not far from New York, right? Penn State campus. It's like right below the line or something. No?
That's not State College, it's down.
Yeah, no, State College, that's what I mean.
It's central PA.
Yeah, it's not far from New York, compared to Florida. Right?
Correct.
Closer.
So the grower did a great, Florida's close compared to Oslo, right? Grower did a great job here again, but you see, the grower wasn't there anymore. And so both of those little pencil-sized couple leaves at the top grew. There's my best estimate of what the tree looked like when it was planted. Can y'all see that now? I'm telling you what, this is going to drive you crazy. It's going home. And you got to pay attention to the road. You're going to be seeing this absolutely everywhere. Now you can come in and correct this. You can be light or you can be more aggressive and make those sorts of reduction cuts and get the structure back, because you actually got a decent leader in there. You just have to get sunlight to the leader so that the lateral branches can grow. That's the goal of the structural pruning, right? To get sunlight to the leader and slow down the competition. Those two things happen. That's how you get your reaction. So the more sunlight you get to that lead, the more it grows. The slower this grows that you pruned, and you get your structure back. Usually it'll take you, on a tree like this, 8 inches in caliper or something, probably take you 2 prunings to get it back on that tree. You have to do it once. It's going to sprout to your friends, it's going to give you opportunities, and you work with those. We don't have any time to develop, how to manage that, but you can figure out how to manage those sprouts. This was some pruning on a tree, a species I had never pruned, sugar maple, before. So I was on the, don't tell Longwood Gardens, Sean Kister on the campus. No, I told him eventually, but I had never pruned sugar maple. And so this is by the director's house, right about 200 feet from the house where he lives on the gardens over here. So we had these 3 sugar maples, lots of branches, triple leader up here. If you look carefully, I'm going to show you the tree from a different angle, you'll be able to see that. That was probably the top of the tree when it was planted. So here's the tree. That's probably what the canopy looked like. And I just went through my collection, found a tree. This is actually Norway maple, I think, on the right, but found a tree that was kind of similar to this. I'm going to blow it up so you can see there is what can be a leader. It's not a leader yet. You've got to suppress the competition, but if you don't, 2 or 3 of them are going to grow and you end up with that. But that's what it looked like when it was planted. Doesn't look bad, really. I mean, technically has a leader up there. But if we let him go, that's what we're going to get. So this is probably 10 inches of caliber, more or less, and the guys had not structurally pruned it. So we went for broke. Said, well, I didn't tell him I had never pruned sugar maple before, and I was wondering, as we're pruning this thing, am I taking too much off this? Am I taking too much off? The pile is pretty big. The arborist is holding up 3 fingers. The biggest cut is 3 inches. So that's this, either this one or probably that one there, biggest cut. So there's probably 30 cuts in there, a lot. So I wasn't really sure. So I left, flew home, saved myself good luck with that. So here's a year later on the left. So how'd we do? Fine. On this tree anyway, very little sprouting to deal with, so we're really happy with that. We pruned it again. So this is 12 months after the first prune. See, can you see the difference? So we have, before pruning, we got lots of uprights. After pruning, they're making lots of reduction cuts up there. Pretty fine pruning. Pretty good job, actually. But what do you notice about the second pruning? Smaller cuts, just as many cuts, but smaller. So a lot more biology was taken, a lot less biology was taken off of the tree. So there's the response after the second pruning. So we're already turning a shrub, arguably a shrub, into a tree. Back into what the tree looked like when it was planted. 3 more years, no more pruning, 3 more years. So this will be a nice leader up there. Still have some competition, but that's what this tree is. It's bigger. It's 10 inches instead of being 4 to 6. So it may take 3 prunings to get this tree back under control. So it's urban friendly. See, what's happening is, and here's another 2 years. So now what's happening is you can now come back here as an urban tree manager and get your clearance. Now you're taking off really small branches on a much bigger trunk. And tell me what structure inside the tree is at the base of these small aspect ratio branches. Shigo described it 40 years ago. People before him described it as well. What is that structure inside small aspect ratio branches? Inside the trunk at the base of the branch. You guys know.
Column.
Inside the collar. So what is it that's in there that's special? Yeah, small aspect ratio branches often have collars, absolutely. But the collar itself is just an expression of what's going on inside. What's going on inside is the branch protection zone. So the branch protection zone, is that what you were thinking?
Yeah.
Well, why did you say it? I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You can embarrass yourself in front of 60 of your friends, right? So if you, my wife found a wonderful, it's on my iPhone, a wonderful cone. So when that branch protection zone union lays on the ground for a few years, the branch wood will decay, and the outline of the three-dimensional cone will not. And so you can, has anyone gone to the forest floor and seen these cone-shaped depressions, right?
Yes.
You can see them up in trees too, from old pruning cuts, when you old removal cuts, on branches that are smaller compared to the parent branch. So when you raise the crown, you've got that protection zone which pretty much prevents decay from moving back into the trunk. Now, if you were to come back, if you were to take off a bigger branch 7 years ago, and it was big compared to the trunk, there's no protection zone. So as the aspect ratio gets bigger, you can read the research. Again, I had grad student work on that about 15 years ago. There's nothing to prevent the decay from going back into the trunk. So keeping them small's got real important attributes. So we went, there was a question. Somebody had their hand up, yeah.
As a visual learner, the top of that, is that what you would consider to be just about the right amount of, it looks slightly crowded to me.
Yeah.
That could be a misconception.
Okay, so there's great question. I like the way you think. You're thinking about this. And so you're going to get this. You're going to be going home, pruning trees on your way home. So you have to leave enough buds and wood in what you want to grow. So you're going to suppress all this, going to leave that, and sometimes you have to leave a double or triple because if you reduce those, you just get a sense, well, I'm going to slow the leader down as well. So you don't want to slow everything down. You want to slow everything except the leader down. So I'll often leave the top alone. Yeah, like this obviously was before pruning, and it's kind of back, but after 2 prunings in 6 years, it's a heck of a lot better from this. And here's why. All these that are competing with the leader come from way down here. Now, these that are up at the top come from the top. A lot less of the severe pruning situation, right? You have to take a lot less off. I spent a lot of time in the Illustrated Guide to Pruning going over that part. We're just about at the, yes, sir.
You keep mentioning 2 or 3 prunings. I mean, does it ever really end? I mean, I look at that and I see, oh, they're there at the top in 10 years.
So the question is, does it ever really end? So if you're a street tree manager, you're doing this every 5 to 7 years-ish or something like that. And so you're 20 years into the thing and you've created your clearance, and now you may choose to let the top go. But you've at least got your clearance, you've got your lead, you don't have these real long nursery branches that were initially very aggressive. Those have been suppressed and you've been taken care of. The natural form of the tree now is going to take over. And the tree will calm down because in those first 2 or 3 prunings, you're pruning away the tree's response to what was done in the nursery. Eventually that goes away. Pretty much out of time. It was enjoyable. Let's do this outside sometime. I'd love to come back.
Thank you, Ed. We had talked about that at the last conference you were
We
here.
did. I remember
And then
that.
COVID hit.
Yes.
But we are still in talks
we're
of
still
bringing like
out
a
there.
traveling one.
But I noticed one thing in life is you don't get younger.
No, and you do want to escape the heat of Florida in the summertime, so maybe we can do it then. So to reiterate, the ISA credit for this one is 22-045 in case you need it for your records. And then we do have at the front desk, and also I do have copies here if you want for our survey for this conference. We value your opinions. We do go through this very diligently. So if you have any thoughts, please share. And thank you once again for joining us.
Thanks,
Safe
guys.
travels.